When I come and do presentations, especially 15-minute ones, as a lecturer who has to speak for hours, I always think, but what am I going to say when I get there? It's often going to be different to what I planned. So I've done something a little bit different, but it's very much connected to the research project. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and talk about emotions as method, brutal lessons from studying dementia. So the idea there is that I'm trying to bring the project that I'm doing back more in line with what I think I'm a bit more interested in academically. I'll explain that as I go through. So this work is supported by the Foundation for Sociology of Health and Illness, my university, Trent, Dementia UK have been involved, Trent Bridge Community Trust, Trent Dementia as well. I've all have given some support in various ways. A quick intro, I'm almost certainly the least knowledgeable in the room in terms of dementia care. So I just want to get that out there at the start. My origin was in sociology of sport, basically. So I studied sport, but as a part of my PhD, which I did here, I started boxing, and I boxed for a decade. And reading between the lines, if I've boxed for a decade, I probably had some problems along the way with my own brain function. So that's why I dropped out of that. I won't talk too much about that because it gets quite emotional, and I struggle to talk about the whole thing. But that's the core of some of the kind of issues that I present today, is that one, I don't really know much about dementia care, but two, I've got very much lived experience of some of the problems that might lead to young onset dementia, CT, and some of those sort of things. Hopefully not. And the second part is that my academic focus isn't really on the stuff that we're talking about. My academic focus, where I'm really interested, is philosophy of science. So balancing between where I really want to be reading and writing, and I want to start writing my next book as soon as possible because I've just finished my last one, and that's really where my head is, with something else which is a kind of a moral compulsion to do this sort of work. And the work, just so it's not kind of left with that title that I'm not going to talk about, is with former professional footballers, and mainly their carers, and looking at their lived experiences and how we can support them with the care. I actually hate football as well, so that's another thing. It makes me a very good researcher, I think, in this topic area, because a lot of people is anyone from the sports department here? I know Kieran would be, a few of you. Well, all right. I came to Loughborough and left hating sport. Don't know what that tells you. Also, while I was here, while I was in halls, we had our heating cut off. So it's reminded me of today, being back on campus. So the title, just as a reminder, Emotions as Method, Brutal Lessons from Studying Dementia. And it's the brutality that is kind of the interesting bit for me. When we were doing this work, and we had a research fellow, Jane Rowley, who works with Tom Denning at Trent Dementia, Jane did the work for me. One of the consistent conversations we had while we were doing this work was about the brutality of the stuff that she was experiencing. She's a very experienced researcher and works in dementia care. But what she was finding was something a bit different about these people's experiences, the speed that it came on at, the difficulty in dealing with these men who are often quite strong and fit, and all the rest of it. So it's drawn me to an area where I'm really interested, which is the emotions as a part of science. Because normally we think of science as this distinctively rational enterprise, and of course it is, of course. And if we listen to the talks today, and it was also one of the questions I asked about co-production, there's a lot of rationality that we've gone through. We've known this, we've found this, or we didn't find this. But there's very little discussion of the emotions and all of this stuff. But this area is distinctly emotional for most of us involved in it. So a part of my kind of reading around this area in general is around what's called in the social sciences the emotive turn, which happened in the 90s, where people started to theorize the emotions much better as a part of social science. And you'll all know if you're involved in research, the importance of emotions in ethics, in terms of researchers not making emotional burdens of themselves within research and caring for the participants as part of the ethical considerations. And then more recently, there's a paper just been published by Catherine Quinn and colleagues about the emotional labour of doing this work, of speaking to people and being aware of this work and how damaging it can be in emotional researcher well-being and all of those sort of interesting things. And they're all really important. But What tends to get missed, because we think science is such a rational enterprise, is that emotions is a central part of our work, not just as an outcome for us to manage. So that's why it's emotions as method, not emotions as a part of what we do, but as a method for what we do. So I guess the talk I'm going to do now, that's the setup. Hopefully it won't take me too long, but this is going to be a paper that I'll write at some point, and it builds off a paper that I've already got under review. And I think there's 4 elements to this, which I think are 4 elements that fit into all good. I'm going to say social science, because that's my area, but I think probably this is all good science. And I know people don't like it when you say, you're defining good science. Well, yeah, I'm going to try to. So first thing is, the emotions fit into something of our approach. I don't mean that in an academic approach, as in I'm going to use this theoretical frame or a disciplinary frame. But why we approach this topic in the way we do, the need, I've already talked about a moral compulsion to do the work, even though it's really hard for me. And that can lead to discussions around standpoint epistemology, that we always take a standpoint in relation to the work that we do. I think that's not discussed enough. I think that the reason why we do our work, I think a lot of social scientists especially, get wary of putting our emotions front and center of the work, in case that people will say, oh, well, you're biased. As if the notion of controlling emotions is 1, possible because it's not, and 2, would make me unbiased, which is false. And I think when me and Jane, our work, and the others are involved in it, we're all driven to do this work. I mean, maybe because there's personal gain academically. I mean, that's not why I do it. And most people, I don't think, do this for that work. But it's because it is something which we're drawn to know more about and to help people. That's an emotional connection. The phrase is that it matters. And it matters more beyond trying to get a promotion or trying to get some money in. I mean, people do get money for doing this. I've just heard all of the people who have got money for doing this. There's lots of money, but when our careers are reduced to that, they become quite insignificant, I think. And there's something much more significant here, and that's this notion of it mattering. And that's an idea which has been written about a lot in philosophy of science. There's a book called Social Science That Matters. And Andrew, for any of the PGRs in the room who want to look at this, Andrew Sayer is a very good academic who's written about this. So that's our approach, and I think this is at the core of our methodologies, the setup for our methodologies. Then there's the contacting. So in each research project we approach, but we also contact. We make some contact with the world out there, an empirical contact. We've talked about randomized control trials, we've talked about interviews. My work has been mainly ethnographic work in boxing settings. That's how we make contact. And again, emotions are fundamentally tied to that, not only in how we approach people to interview them. And the research fellow, Jane, she had to have multiple conversations before she could even approach having an interview, because these issues are very, very difficult to get people to speak about in a cautious and caring way. And actually, she also rejected quite a few. We only got 10 people to speak to us in this research project. It was quite small. But the work that went in to get to those 10 was heavy, very heavy, emotionally and also time-consuming. And we ended up, well, she did it mainly as a judgment call, rejecting people and saying, we just don't think it's appropriate for you to be interviewed for various reasons to do with their own well-being. So that process of contacting, making contact with people, not just, hello, may you speak to me, but contacting the empirical world as well, and asking questions about the emotions, and not just that, but experiencing emotions with people. Once we have that and we have some sort of data and the emotions infuse that across the board in various ways, we would then think about some sort of grasping. And what I mean by that is an intellectual grasping. And of course, what we would do there is we would do some sort of formal content analysis or thematic analysis or whatever, so maybe some stats for other people. And I think that misses something very core at this process. If I want to get to know someone and something of their experience, I don't do a content analysis of a conversation I've had with them. I listen to them, I feel what they're saying, and I concentrate on them, and they concentrate on me. And by the end of that, I felt something with them. This is an idea about intersubjectivity we could talk about there. But there's not that much in science about those issues. We don't talk about how I felt this from this interview. Why? Because when we get a reviewer, they'll go, what do you mean you felt it? Prove it. Rationalize it for me. And that would be a kind of dichotomy, wouldn't it? It would be, well, there's emotions this side, and then there's facts and rationality and proof this side. And that's false. That is philosophically a kind of poor position to take. But the better position would be that we navigate the world as humans and as researchers using both the emotions and rationality all at the same time. We may have a distinctly rational process where we do our analysis. I'm going to start my analysis today. I'm going to code these pieces of paper. But of course, all of the work that's gone into that has been embedded with an emotional understanding of the world. In that I felt something with these people, and I think that that's something really important and that it matters, and it goes back to that notion of significance. So, we talk in one of the papers that we've done, and I do this with my PhD students quite a lot, about the researcher feeling they found something. And the reviewers hate it, but it's true. Like, I don't know how many times I have to say this during reviews for someone to go, oh yeah, that is true, isn't it? We do feel stuff. We get a hunch, we get a feeling, we have an imagination, oh, I think that's a thing. And then we do the work to try and rationalize that in the data and to see it and point to it. But it doesn't mean to say that the rational was there. It means that the emotional was there and we've tried to rationalize it. And I talk about this in my latest book about the notion of dwelling. We dwell in those experiences. And we can't just dwell in them and say, oh, well, I thought this, so I'm just going to publish it. That ain't going to work, because that's not science. But we cannot go the completely opposite way. And we can dwell on those ideas and look for them in the data, and we can go back to data, and we can get more data, and we can speak to other people. And that's what the process of analysis, that's the process of grasping as an emotional process looks like. Long-term, cyclical, dwelling, experiencing, being made sad by the data all over again, remembering an interview that was really sad all over again, and then looking to try and present some of that as well. So the final thing, so we've got approaching. This is what I think all good social science does. It all approaches, it all tries to grasp something. It all approaches, it all tries to make contact with the empirical world, it all tries to grasp something intellectually with our analysis. And then finally, we should all try to communicate it, which is what we're doing today. And the way in which we communicate that, again, is infused with emotion. It's hard to communicate a randomized control trial with emotion, right? We saw that, it's difficult. But that work will be full of emotion. And there will be other ways that those colleagues will be communicating that in different ways. I'm sure it will happen. So some lead themselves in better and worse ways to that emotion being an element. What's that? I haven't got my glasses on. 2. 3, okay. I took my glasses off, all over the place. That's good timing. So the way that we're going to try and manage this, the next bit of the research, is to try and do some kind of visual articulations of people's experiences. Not only so that we can communicate to a wider audience, easier to present imagery than it is theoretical discussions to a wider audience, but I think that artistic representations are so much better at getting the emotions across. It is very rare that you'll read an academic paper and be brought to tears, but you'll watch a film or theatre and be brought to tears regularly because you grasp something more of the emotion. And it's at that point there where I think our job as academics, I think most academics have lost contact with that emotional side of their work when they communicate it and when they present it and theorize it and analyze it. I guess it could be the fetishism of rationality. It could be a way of grasping it, that we must rationalize this to the point where we lose the humanity in it. Ling and Franks talk about this in the book, Sociology of the Real World, in relation to the realness of emotions. And just let me pull it back now to the kind of focus of the day. And it's nice that this all links back up, but if we're talking about inequalities and communities, the way in which you can do something about inequalities in various communities that are underserved is to get to their life, to get to their emotional experiences. The realness of someone's experiences. We may say it's emotions are socially constructed, and they are in part. But when you get to someone's experiences and live them with them and experience them with them, that's where I think this makes the most difference, in that we can communicate with those communities where they are and the inequalities that they're experiencing are emotional. They're emotional in their outcomes. So I guess, how can I finish? We need to centralise the emotions in our work much more. That would be an obvious one. And that this work especially is so emotional. I especially encourage the PGRs and the ECRs who are in the room to write about this in methods, especially in theses, because you have so much room to write about this. I'll finish there.